All right. Namaste. We're joined by Ross Jackson. Hello, Ross. How are you?
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to meet you as well. Ross, could you tell us a little bit about your journey in starting the Gaia Trust and then also starting the Global Eco Village Network? Jen?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a long story, but I think I was trained in physics and economics, and I was working for the first 20 years or so of my professional career as a management consultant, and not very much interested in spirituality, but I was very interested in the environment, right back into the early 1970s. And then in the 1980s, I was at a conference in India and on transpersonal psychology, of all things, with Stanislav Grof, you may have heard of, the psychiatrist who has worked with LSD and later with non-drug techniques. And I was visiting the ashram of his guru, Swami Muktananda, near Bombay, and I had this very powerful spiritual experience, which was a kind of an awakening, you might call it, and that changed my life. I began to realize that there was a lot more between heaven and earth than I had realized. It was like it was at a totally different level of consciousness, and so I decided basically that I had to uh, change sort of the course of my life and focus not just on a business career and making money and so forth, to do something more meaningful, for the world and for the planet, because it was very much a planetary experience. I experienced very much the Earth like as a blossoming flower and that sort of thing. And this led me to form the Gaia Trust in 1987, three years later, with a few Danish friends. And our idea was uh, to support various efforts within sustainability and spirituality that would, move the world in the correct new direction. And we had no money at the time, but I was working in the international finance area and developed some software, which I found was quite lucrative for trading currencies. And I used that to develop a daughter company of Gaia Trust that could basically earn 90% of the money that was coming in. And within a few years, we had established not a great deal, but enough money to start doing something with. And I uh, I introduced, or I rather, I called a meeting in 1991 with a number of people around the world who I knew of directly and indirectly to discuss, what kind of strategies we should be using at Gaia Trust to use the funds available. And after some discussion for several days, we more or less reached a consensus that we are asking ourselves, well, who's actually doing something here on the ground? There are a lot of white papers at that time, and there were a lot of talks and conferences about sustainability. Um, but my feeling was that we pretty much knew everything that we had to know. We knew what the problems were, and we knew in fact, what the solutions were. We just had to start implementing them. And that led us to think about who's actually doing something on the ground. And that very quickly led us to think of the people who are living in these eco-villages around the world. At that time, there weren't that many, but there were a few big ones like Findhorn in Scotland and Oroville in India, Solheimer in Iceland, Damanhur in Italy, and a few others. And they were very inspiring. And most of these places were actually had a spiritual dimension, which attracted me quite a bit. So we decided that perhaps the best thing we could do was to try to link these various projects together into a kind of a network so that they could feel that they were more than just a single project, but that they were part of a larger movement working on towards the same ends. And that resulted in us forming 4 years later, after a number of meetings with interested persons, to form the Global Eco Village Network in 1995. And that began by we began by forming networks in the three major regions in the Americas, in Europe, Africa, and in Asia, and had set up offices in each region and started connecting these various eco-villages together. And Gaia Trust financed the project for the first few years. And yeah, so that was 30 years ago. And this year we were actually celebrating our 30th anniversary this summer. And so it's
So what was
yeah.
the benefit of creating a network of these eco villages? And actually even before that, if you could tell us what an eco village is and why you thought connecting them would be fruitful.
But what is an eco-village? We spend a lot of time talking about that. Basically, these are relatively small communities, normally from say 50 to several hundred people. Most of them are less than 200, a few are bigger. And what they have in common is they have a value system which goes across religion and race and geography and culture. One of the things we found is that these people who are focusing on living close to nature and prioritizing living lightly on the earth have a very similar value systems. And this makes them into a very powerful force. And my feeling at the time, back in these 30 years ago, was that this was a movement which potentially could shift the paradigm eventually, because I felt then, and even more so today, that the current global trends are towards very destruction of the environment, and things are sort of falling apart. In fact, I think we've been gradually collapsing over the last 60 years or so, and there's no sign of that letting up. And so my thinking was that the Global Eco-Village Network, these networks of small communities, could actually perhaps provide a foundation for something new if and when the larger society starts collapsing on itself. And so this was sort of the vision that we had, that eventually people are going to come around to realizing that this way of living is not only more sustainable, but it's also a much more pleasant way to live in community with like-minded people, and with a high priority on the quality of life and not just on material things. So that was more or less the thinking behind it.
And to clarify, people who live in an eco-village, they have come from different places and are converging on a particular geographical region or a small place, and then they are building a community together de novo. Is that what an eco-village is?
No,
So it's an intentional community?
each eco-village is different. In fact, there's a tremendous diversity, but they're typically people who live, each person in an eco-village typically has their own family, their own housing. Sometimes they have a collective, but more likely than not, they'll have their own housing, and they will have open areas, with no hedges between the houses, and with cars on the periphery, and with some land normally where they can have perhaps animals and grow their own food, and sort of thing. So in this community, as I said, typically it might be from 50 to 500 people, and they're found today all over the globe, in just about every country, in all the continents. And these are people who simply feel that this is a better kind of life. In fact, I think in many ways that the eco-village movement is kind of a modern day successor to the indigenous peoples. You might say that they're still surviving in various places around the globe, who have very similar values. And so, but the difference is that we accept, the modern conveniences. We're not trying to go backwards to something more primitive. So we accept high technology and so forth, but we try to prioritize so that we keep in mind that we have to be much kinder to nature and take account of keep high priority on having clean water, clean forest, clean soil, clean air, and so forth.
I just wanted to clarify, in an eco-village, people may not necessarily be from that place. They may have come from other places to go live in that eco-village. Is that correct?
No, not normally. Normally they're from that place. They're local.
Oh, they are local. Okay.
Oh, yes, yes.
Because in Oroville, for example, there are people from all around the world who have
Yeah,
converted.
Oroville is a bit of an exception. You know, that was especially designed to be an international community, but that's not the normal thing.
That's
No.
not the norm. Okay.